All right, Paul. So we're talking about cold openers, right? So we're talking about LinkedIn messages, cold email, cold calls even. Let's see an MSP is reaching out to a cold prospect. So the first thing I want to ask you is, in my brain, like it has to be a question, right? To spark a conversation. I'm thinking like you're either making a statement and you need some kind of like give and take. So you're looking for a response. The conversation doesn't start until it's two-sided. And so I'm thinking you're firing a question out right away. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. So I think the problem you've got with any kind of cold communication, be that LinkedIn, email, phone, is first of all, people only buy when they're ready to buy, and therefore people only engage with you when they're ready to engage. But the second one is absolutely that you've got to get some engagement going. So, sales has always been about engagement. It's always been about having a conversation rather than talking at someone. So we all know when you talk at someone, they just don't listen. They can sit and nod, but they're shut down here and they're shut down emotionally. So I think if you can chuck a question out, get some engagement, you're much more likely to then go on and actually start a conversation off the back of that. And that's got to be the primary goal of any of this, is to start a conversation. The issue really is with all of this cold communication stuff is that the numbers are really low. So anyone who's ever sat and thought, right, I'm going to do 50 cold calls, gets to the end of that 50 cold calls and we'll find anything to do rather than have to do that activity again. Literally right down to, I might just go and scrub the oven, or or maybe I'll just go and paint a wall, or anything so that I don't have to pick up, because it's soul destroying. People literally swear at you, people are rude to you, they slam the phone down because you're just an interruption. And I think if you take the cold stuff and just tweak it slightly so it's slightly warm, then you'll get a much better engagement out of it. So LinkedIn is a great example. If for example, you put a post on LinkedIn and someone hits the like button, which not many people do, but someone hits the like button, I think that then gives you an opportunity to message that person, perhaps a day later, to start to engage with them. And to me, that's actually a warm engagement, not a cold engagement, because they've seen your thing, your post, because they liked it or they did something with it. And you're then just attempting to turn that into a conversation.
When you're talking about engagement, that's very top of funnel. And so like, you shouldn't go at it and approach it like you're trying to close somebody immediately. And I think the narrative is that like everybody sort of knows this now, but I don't think that they actually know how to execute it. And specifically around like, what do you ask them? And so like in my book, I talked about, there was a chapter on like, types of content to produce, and podcast is one of them. And I even mentioned in there that like, this is a great opener for business development. So you can reach out to people to be guests that are also potential customers, this kind of thing. So like, I put this in my book. It's something that I experienced on a small scale. And so I thought it was interesting. I've gotten so many of these recently, like I'm starting to hate it. It's like one of those things that it's, people are now in fact using it as like a cold opener, and asking me, I can tell that like beneath the surface, there's maybe a hope to sell me something, but like, they're not bringing that up. What they're bringing up is like, oh, hey, I have this podcast. I have these 9 questions I want to ask you. And so like, have you ever experienced that? Is that like something that you recommend to your clients?
Not quite that, because the vast majority of MSPs don't do podcasts, and probably shouldn't do podcasts, or videos. I mean, great if you can do a podcast or a video, absolutely do it, because it gives you that standout factor. But I prefer more sort of easier things. I like marketing, because that's a brilliant, and by the way, that is a genius method. I ran a PR company. I remember reading this in your book and laughing. So I ran a PR company, a public relations company, 10 years ago. And we used to use exactly that same technique. But if we wanted to get into a specific industry title, then we would invent a newsletter that our client was launching. And the editor of the magazine, they wanted them to be the guest interview. The newsletter never happened. It was a completely fictitious thing. But 9 times out of 10, it got us on the phone with the editor, and then got the editor on the phone with the client. And guess what? They ended up being in the editor's publication as well. So I love that technique. Here's a specific technique that I recommend to my clients. and it helps that they have all the tools that they need. But for example, if I give my clients a book that they can put their name on the front as if they've written the book, and they change the title so there's not 280 versions of the same book knocking around. But then let's say you're connected to 500 people on LinkedIn. You can then cold message someone on LinkedIn saying, hi David, I've recently written a book about, the current book happens to be about email security, but I've written a book about email security. Did you know you're more likely to be hacked or to be breached through your email than any other way into your network? I'd love to physically send you a physical copy, because of course the book is only got a value when it's a physical book, like those there sat next to you. Having a
product placement.
Product placement. We'll go for the fish as well in the next one. But never mind the wagons in the background. But the book has a value when it's physical. So I'd like to physically post you a copy. Is 10 so-and-so street still your address? So, this isn't something you can mass email out. You've got to literally go and get their address. You put their name in, you say, is so-and-so still your address? Now that's a great cold email, because it's a personal question. It shows you've actually done some work. Is so-and-so and so-so still your address? Most of those people that get that message will still not reply to it, which is kind of frustrating. So you've got two things here. The ones that do reply, you've started a conversation. They might reply with no thanks, or yeah, tell me more about that, or what's that about, or yes, please, I'm still at that address. Great, we can have a conversation about it. What's interesting is you can also have a conversation with the ones that don't, because the people who don't reply, you now have a reason to call them. So you can call them 2 days later, and when you speak to their gatekeeper, you can say, yep, I've been chatting with David on LinkedIn, which obviously is a slight untruth, but I've been chatting with David on LinkedIn. You can call him and say, David, hi, I know you must be so busy. I sent you a LinkedIn message a couple of days ago because I've got a physical copy of my book I wanted to send you. Just wanted to check, is this still your address? And that then leads on into a conversation about what the book is, which leads on to a conversation about who you are, which leads on to a conversation about what kind of IT support have they currently got. Now, again, the numbers are going to be pretty low on these, but that to me is a slightly warmer engagement than just sort of calling someone out the blue and, as you say, trying to sell them something straight off the bat.
It's a great point. Like sending the book, physical product, we do it all the time. We actually do it specifically on like people that are high engagement on our newsletter. We kind of just send them unannounced. And we do it kind of on a routine basis. And then again, it's one of those things where you can follow up on it. And so it's like you see somebody starting to engage, but they haven't really reached out to you yet, but they're engaging with content. Now you can send them a book and then follow up and just say, hey, I sent you a surprise. You got a book in the mail. We saw it got delivered. Just wanted to double check and make sure. So one of the things that we've been working on recently with a client is, and very like event focused tactics, but what I've noticed is that the virtual event space, obviously it's pretty saturated right now. But what that means is like people are clamoring to get attendees for their events. And so we've actually done a few tests where we're sending out messages based, for companies that are obviously trying to push events and sort of coming at it that way, where, you are giving, because again, the whole thing is like people are pretty self-serving, right? When it comes to this, and they're more likely to, it's like the podcast thing. They're more likely to engage when they're seeing like some kind of benefit for them. And so that's sort of like one way in, is if you can help somebody promote, like, especially if it's on a local basis. So like someone that's doing a local event in your community, and maybe it's virtual, maybe it's not, but you can help them promote it, or you can come and even attend the event to engage and just start those conversations. And then if you don't see events, we've actually had some success of like messaging and saying, hey, we're specializing in this vertical. I see you are a thought leader in this space. I'd love to know if you have any events coming up that we could attend to learn more from you. And so that's a great way, because it puts, obviously it's like a big pat on the back for them. It can come off, I guess, if you don't do it right, it can maybe come off as like a little shaky, like you're trying to twist something or, trick somebody. But for the most time, if you're genuine about it, and if you really are interested and you really do follow through, and you do engage with them, it tends to work. And so we've seen some good responses on that. So anything that you guys are working on or seeing as far as LinkedIn messaging outside of the ones that you mentioned?
No, and nothing more than I'd sort of add there. I think in general, the general principle which you've absolutely got bang on there is make yourself valuable to the other person in some way. And the worst kind of selling and marketing is where you come at it from your point of view and you're thinking, I've got to speak to 10 people. I need some more clients. I need some more leads. It's completely the wrong way of coming at it. In fact, it's interesting. I'm talking about people, you were saying, Kevin, that people are reaching out to you. I have a podcast, and somehow I've ended up on a directory somewhere of everyone who's trying to innovate in the podcast space is messaging me, trying to get me to try their app or try their whatsoever. And there's one, I can't remember what it was called, but it's an app which pulls out clips of your podcast automatically and transcribes it and edits it. And it's a bit rough around the edges at the moment. It's not something we're ready to use. So I had a chat with the founders. They emailed me. I had a chat with the founders. I kind of pushed them away. And just this morning, they've sent me a couple of clips from my latest podcast saying, we just thought we'd make a couple of snippets. I think it's called snippets. Thought we'd make a couple of snippets for you so you can see what development we've made in the app. So instead of just writing to me and saying, hey, we've improved X, Y, and Z, they actually took the time, and maybe they've done this for everyone on their prospect list, but they've taken the time to actually produce a bit of an outcome for me. And at the I didn't think it had improved that much, but the point was, I opened the email, I read it, I forwarded it onto my podcast guy, I replied to her, and we've now engaged again in a bit of conversation.
And you're talking about it right now.
And I'm talking about it right now. And whereas if she just sent me an update, hey, we've updated the app, I would have just deleted it and wouldn't even have read it because it's not something I'm interested in. So I think you're absolutely right. Is you've got to get at it from their point of view. The best book I've ever read about this, and I'm embarrassed to admit I only read this book during lockdown because it's been out for a few years, and it is one of those books that within 10 pages of reading it, I promoted it to my bookshelf of best books, of which, you really have to have a good book. Your book is on my bookshelf of best books, Kevin, and I'm not fawning there. It's true. There's just so much good stuff in there, and it's so relevant to the marketplace that I'm talking to. But it's a book by a guy called Marcus Sheridan, and it's called They Ask, You Answer. And I'm sure you've read it. It's all about. Oh, you haven't? Oh, okay.
No, this is now though.
Right. Wait till your wife and your kids are away for a weekend, and you know how you're planning. Right, I'm going to have beer, watch the game. I'm going to get the boys around, whatever. No, scrap that. Read this book instead, and just immerse yourself in this book. So it's about content marketing, but it's written by an ordinary guy who's not one of these content marketing people, and he like us, yeah. And 9 years ago, or no, 13 years ago, in the 2007 recession, he ran a swimming pool company which was spending a fortune on Google ads and various other platforms to try and bring in leads, and they were just hemorrhaging money. And he bet the whole business on switching to content marketing. But the way they did it, there's sort of two things. One is they did very long form content, so really stupidly long content, which is really good for SEO.
Like 2,000 plus words.
And more and more
okay.
and more. And in fact, you can go and look at some of his content. I'll give you the URL in a second to go and look at his current content. But that was the first thing they did. But the second thing they did, which I think is more important, is they hooked into what do people want to know. So, for example, I'm in the UK. We don't have swimming pools because we'd all freeze to death. But there is, I'm sure, in the right parts of the States, you've got a choice between fiberglass pools, concrete pools, and there's a third one. So this guy's company only did fiberglass pools, but they wrote a 5,000 word review comparing fiberglass pools to concrete pools to whatever the third type of pool is. So they were talking about the downsides of their own product, and why a fiberglass pool isn't quite right. And the reason they wrote that is because often they'd go out and they'd meet with people, and these people had in their head a concrete pool, and a fiberglass pool was never going to be the right solution for them. So it was something they could send to people in advance. What happened, there was within a couple of days of publishing it, they were top of the search results for fiberglass or concrete pool worldwide. So they were getting sales inquiries coming in from people all over the world where they couldn't possibly service those inquiries. And that was what hooked them onto, hang on a second, we can generate a lot of traffic to our site, but also we can really educate our audience about the things that they need to be educated on. So they then started looking at all of their sales meetings and saying, what are the common questions? What are the frequently asked questions? And instead of doing a frequently asked questions page with like a 50-word reply, they do, as you say, a 2,000-3,000 word reply, really getting into detail. And the more of this content they did, the more swimming pools they sold, the more leads they got, the more sales. So it's not surprising that he's now running a marketing agency. So he still owns the pool company, and it's called something like, I've got it in my Chrome here, it's Impact. If you just search for Marcus Sheridan Impact, and you'll come across it, and go and look at his resources section, and he sign up for his newsletter, and it'll blow your mind. There's too much content for me to read, and it's really good content. He must have dozens of full-time people generating content, but I bet they have thousands of leads a week coming into that agency, and they pre-qualify really well, because I think they just want companies that they can hold their hand and charge them, $100,000 to go off and do it for them, which is a good end of the marketing agency end to be. But the book is the second I read it, I said to every MSP I know, you have to read this book, because take out pool company, put in MSP. Take pricing, for example. Now, you can find loads of my stuff where I say, do not put your prices on your website. And I was wrong. I was wrong in every possible way, because we all know that the answer to how much is it is, well, it depends what you want. So that's what you put on your website, because people are already, if they get 3 MSPs in, this guy's $25 a user, this guy's 35, this guy's 45. They're comparing those, going, well, let's go for the 35 guy. Or let's go for the 25 guy. They don't realize they're not comparing equal packages. This guy's bundled in security, this guy hasn't. This is including the 365. So they're trying to compare stuff that can't be compared. So therefore, you put your prices on your website, and you say it starts from so-and-so per user or per device, but it depends what you want in. In fact, wouldn't that be a great article to talk about all the different things that go in? Not in a way that's only of interest to techs, but in a way that you'd have that conversation with end users. So I think that book, more than any other book, will help you to understand marketing from their point of view. And that, in this day and age, they are going to go, if you don't give them the answer quickly and on your website, they're going to go somewhere else to find it. So actually, you might as well be that somewhere else that they're going to look for it. I'll tell you where this works incredibly well. And you mentioned vertical marketing. I have a client who is quite dominant in his vertical. And we had this conversation about having this approach. He will literally dominate that vertical for a decade if he can pull off this approach in that vertical. Because the beauty of a vertical is it's very focused anyway. There's a finite number of prospects. They're all over the country or all over the world. If you can pull off that content marketing trick or that content marketing method within a vertical, no one will ever be able to touch you, ever. So the only way they'd ever be able to do it is by being a cheap and cheerful version of what you're doing, which is, no one wants cheap and cheerful clients anyway.
Let's say you send an outgoing request, and let's say it's to like a vertical specific market, and you have some kind of like vertical specific, and so let's say it's legal, and you're so like IT for the legal industry. They're probably like, you almost don't even have to say why you're reaching out, because it's pretty obvious at that point that what you're doing is. And so what I always tell MSPs is like, look for people that treat them almost as subscribers to your content. Don't just, reach out to people on LinkedIn and hope to like immediately start a conversation. Then you're sending them a quote 5 days later. That's not how it works. But if you were to really target people and say like, we're going to produce this type of vertical specific content, and I want these people to then engage with it. Because what's going to happen is you're going to connect with them. If they do accept, then your content is going to show up in their feed. And so now, as long as it's relevant to them, and that's why you do it like on a really targeted basis. And so as long as they're accepting those requests, the response or lack of response is really not that important at that point, right? Because now like they've essentially subscribed to you, to your content, and they might start just engaging on the back end, at their own pace. It could be a few weeks, it could be 3 months, could be a year, right? And then, but you're building authority is what you're doing, and you're building that thought leadership within the vertical.
Yeah,
and
it's an
relevance is huge.
It is, and it's an early stage relationship. And people buy when they're ready to buy, but they don't understand technology, and they're scared of technology, which is why they stick with MSPs that they don't like for a period of time, as sometimes happens. So the more that people will pick your MSP because they like you, It's an emotional thing. Their brain is rubber stamping a decision that their emotions are making. So therefore, the quicker that you can engage and build a relationship with someone, even if it's a very low level relationship because they've read your stuff, the more likely you are to sell them. It really is as simple as that.